My. What have we here? Greetings, viewers. This is a very, very large pen and somewhat of a special pen. This is a Ranga Model 5. We'll get into just how big this is in a minute if you can't quite tell yet. So this pen is a handmade ebonite pen from India. Unlike a lot of the other Ranga pens which I've shown before, which tend to be fairly moderately priced with steel nibs, this is a decently expensive pen. This is a $300 pen, and the main reason is because of the nib, which we'll get to in a minute. The base pen itself is actually quite reasonable, mostly in line with the other Ranga pens that I've reviewed, but there's a lot of money in the nib on this one, and we will see why. So like I said, Ranga Model 5, this is a handmade pen in ebonite. This particular color is called the Crimson Red. It's a clipless pen, as you can tell. Very basic shaped pen, very cylindrical, rounded ends with a taper here. Let's get some sense for just how big this pen actually is. Okay, as you can see, this is a very, very big pen. So here it is compared to a Lamy Safari and a Pilot Metropolitan, and it positively dwarfs those pens. To look at it relative to some other very big pens we have here, this is the Ranga Model 4 CS. It is just a tiny bit shorter than this pen. Here is the Ranga Majestic. It is pretty much the same size as that pen. And here is another more reasonably sized Ranga pen. This is it compared to the Ranga Model 3. So by pretty much any measure, this is a very, very big pen. It is not a particularly light pen, even though ebonite is in general a very light material. Because it's so big, it weighs 48 grams. So not a featherweight pen by any means. It is a screw to uncap pen. It takes 3.5 turns to unscrew, so that's quite a bit. It clearly would post here. I'm not going to post it, even though I'm a big fan of posting. First of all, it's plenty big without posting, and I really just want to try to preserve this finish a bit. But it is a pretty big pen. The ebonite material that it is made out of is really nice. It's nicely polished. It is definitely a handmade pen. It shows signs of being handmade, which I think looks great. It is not like a flawless machine-made, injection molded plastic type thing. So this is clearly a handmade ebonite pen. Not pretty much, every part of this pen, with the exception of the converter and the nib, is ebonite. It has these threads here and a step down. Now, if you were to hold it by this step down, it probably would be a bit uncomfortable, but there's absolutely no reason to hold it. You have this nice big section with this great flare at the end. So you have a big comfort zone to hold the pen. So that's just great, and it is quite comfortable to hold, and as you can see, plenty long, unposted, but not particularly heavy. Like I said, ebonite, not a really weighty material, so you're going to find a lot of comfort here. Now, let's talk about the nib, and that's really where the cost is involved. This is an 18-karat gold Bock number 8 nib. Now, number 8 nib is a big nib. Just to put it in perspective for comparison, let's compare this number 8 nib to some other nibs. So this is our number 8 Bock nib compared to a number 6 Bock nib. This happens to be a titanium number 6 Bock nib. As you can see, it is quite a bit bigger. Let's look at it compared. This is a Pilot size 15 nib, which is the very big nib that Pilot makes. You can see it is still bigger than that. One nib which is comparable in size to that nib is the nib on the Montblanc 149. It's very, very similar to this Bock number 8 nib. So we are talking about a very, very big nib, which looks great on a pen this size. So one thing that you always was problematic with something like this this Ranga Majestic, it's a very, very big pen, and although the number 6 nib is not a small nib by any means, it's a very, very big nib, it looks a little small in this pen because the pen is so big. You do not have that problem here. This is a nice, substantial size nib that really matches and suits the pen quite well. So now let's talk about this nib a little bit in some detail. So it's, like I said, it's a big nib. It's the Bock number 8 nib. This one is in broad. It is not labeled as such, but it is in broad. It's got the Bock logo. It's got scroll work. It's got the word Bock and 750 for 18 karat gold. One thing that is really, really nice about this Bock nib unit, most Bock nib units, any of the small size ones, including the number 6, have a plastic feed. For the number 8 size nib units with Bock, you get an ebonite feed, which I think is just terrific. And this nib writes great. It's a nice broad nib, and we will see that shortly. But the cost of this pen is really pretty much all in the nib, and this is just a great nib and a really beautiful pen. As you can tell from my other videos, I'm a very, very big fan of the Ranga pens, and I think they do a really nice job. So without any further ado, let's see how this pen writes. Oh, before we actually do the writing sample, one thing I didn't talk about was the filling mechanism. So you have a couple of options here. It is a cartridge converter, and it does come with a cartridge. However, this can easily be eyedroppered. It already comes greased up and everything ready to go, and you can actually put obviously a ton of ink in here, and it is very, very suitable for eyedroppering. And if you just want to pull the converter out and eyedropper it. Okay, folks, what we're writing with here is a Ranga Model 5, and this of course has the number 8 Bock 18 karat nib in broad, and this nib just writes great. It's a nice, fairly juicy writing nib. The broad nib is a little bit stubby, actually. So if you notice, you do get a little bit of a stub effect there in terms of line variation, etc. So it really writes great. A little bit stub-like almost for a broad, but it is a really good, solid line width on this, and just really writes great. And it is, I would say, a pretty wet writing nib. So if you like a nice wet writer, you would not be disappointed with this. And it's definitely not too, and it's not too broad. A lot of these German nibs tend to be just crazy when over the top when it comes to line width. Like sometimes you have a fine, which is almost more like a medium, and a medium which is more like a broad, and a broad which is more like just a triple broad, etc. This I'd say is a solid broad. So this is pretty much, I would say, what it is supposed to be. And like I said, writes really well, and has some nice flow, etc. Not a flex nib though, so this is not a nib you're going to flex or anything like that. This is kind of what you see is what you're getting from a line variation perspective, but nevertheless a good solid writing nib, and it just writes beautifully, complements this really nice pen really well, and a very nice balance of size. You have a huge pen, huge nib, just works really well, and very pleasurable to write with. So like I said, Ranga did a really good job with this pen, and I think the Bock nib just complements it tremendously. I think that might just about do it for this pen. Let's talk a little bit about this ink now. Okay, this ink is Birmingham. Fred Rogers. Cardigan Red. So this is another ink from the Birmingham Pen Company. And like all the inks from the Birmingham Pen Company, they're named after people, places, and things associated with Pittsburgh. So Fred Rogers, for those of you who are maybe younger or not from the U.S., did a children's television show for decades and decades in the U.S. He was originally from Pittsburgh, so that's the connection between Fred Rogers and Pittsburgh. And he was known for wearing a red cardigan sweater that he would put on at the beginning of his show and take off at the end. So that's kind of what he was famous for, so hence the name of this ink. This is a very, very nice shade of red. I'd say it's one of those reds that I tend to classify as a true red, not an orange, not a pink, not any sort of shade of violet. It's really a true red ink, which I like quite a bit. You do pick up a bit of shading in a nice big broad wet nib like this. That is on this Rhodia paper. Let's check it out on Tomoe River paper and see how that would look. Because as we all know, very often the paper makes a big difference on how the inks get, how they end up looking. So this is Fred Rogers. Cardigan Red. And one thing about the Tomoe River paper is the inks do take a bit longer to dry on this because the ink is just sort of sitting on the surface and not soaking into the paper. But this looks pretty nice. It's pretty nice looking, etc. Let's just give this a minute or two to dry and see how that ends up looking. Okay, well, after it's dried, you do see a little bit of color variation, shading, etc., which looks quite nice. So that's a very nice effect as well. And what's also nice is, as usual with the Tomoe River paper, you're not getting bleed through, which is just really good as well. So I think that will just about do it for this video. As always, I thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. Keep those thumbs up coming. And if you have a comment, suggestion, etc., we'd just love to hear it. And as always, until next time, have a great day. Bye-bye.